Forspoken's reviews are all over the place, but I think it's good because it highlights how certain games aren't for everyone. Some people loved it and other people absolutely hated it. Now the general consensus is that is like a 60, it's a 68 on Metacritic as I'm looking right now. And the general consensus is that it's like a solid, 6.5 out of 10 sort of an open world game where if you want to turn off your brain, just turn off your brain, listen to a podcast, do loads of open world objectives. Like that's the sort of game that it is. But I think it's weird how much, even though the 68 is sort of the middle ground, it's weird how varied. So as someone who reviewed the game for GameXplain and on my own channel, who gave it a pretty favourable review, like I enjoyed certain aspects, the combat was fun, the movement was fun. The story was meh, the writing was a bit crap, but the backstory was really good, so that I really enjoyed that part of the game. So as someone who was actually a part of the review process, and I'm now a reviewer, I find it very strange how weird the whole discourse is about this game. A lot of people are, I don't know, there's been a lot of stuff said about the game. Some people like the writing, some people hate the writing. A lot of people saying that the writing isn't much different than any other games, where it is very cringy, but I also find the Marvel dialogue quite cringy as well. But when the Marvel dialogue is done right, which I think in Forspoken it isn't, it can be good. And it's more, I think, like an oversaturation of this sort of Marvel writing that kind of has people so up in arms. And then on top of that, I've seen some people level the criticism at certain reviewers that because the character isn't a white male, then it's not cool. If the character was a white male, then it would be, the dialogue would be cool and the character would be fun. But because she's a black female, there's some racial biases there, which I think is ridiculous. But it's crazy how different the reviews are. So if we have a look here is on Metacritic, we have the highest rated review is 95 out of 100 by Gaming Nexus. And if we scroll down, I've read these reviews that I will mention. And if we scroll down to the end, it's 9.5 out of 10, and it's Forspoken is absolutely fantastic with all the spells you can unlock, the gear you can upgrade, the fights, the bosses, and a storyline that rivals the best video game stories. This isn't a return to form for Square Enix, it's a testament that they still got it, and we will have it for a very long, long time. Which is a review I don't agree with. Again, reviews are opinions, people have different opinions. I am happy for whoever this author is, Joseph, for having so much fun with this game. I didn't have that much fun. But the thing I'm seeing with this review, firstly, there's a few things I don't agree with, and this isn't bashing reviewers, I'm just giving my opinion. So, people can have their own opinions, and fair enough. So the gear you can upgrade, I don't think the gear is very good. You can upgrade the gear, but it doesn't make any difference. The fights are fun, and the bosses, to some extent, are also very good. But the storyline that rivals the best video game stories is something that I think is... I really, really do not agree with this. But in saying that, where I can see this reviewer is coming from is that they say that they do like the writing, which fair enough, you can like the writing. And I think the reason why is if you look at here, you talk about motion blur and they use ooh in brackets. So I think that's given an insight into their style of writing, which I think aligns with the stuff that's in Forspoken. So great. So it's nice that I really like these sort of games. I find them fascinating where there is such a range of 9.5s and 4s, and it's just crazy how people can differ. And these are the sorts of games that I want to see in the gaming industry, because games like this are the sorts of games that I believe they have a more fun conversation. Because in general, if you watch reviews of God of War, I reviewed God of War. I love that game. And literally 95% of reviewers absolutely adored that game. And it's well deserved. But the conversation around it isn't very interesting, which is a part of the reason why I watch YouTube videos, I listen to podcasts, because it's so fun to listen to differing opinions. So then if we move on to obviously IGN, the biggest website and gaming website in the world, and this is reviewed by that last review. I just want to get the names in for everybody. So that is Gaming Nexus by Joseph Maurer. So there you go. And this is Tom Marks at IGN, okay? And the IGN review practically echoes absolutely everything I had to say about the game. So it's an okay game, perfectly fine. Forspoken's flashy combat and parkour can be fun, but they aren't enough to make its cliche story and bare bones open world very interesting to explore. Which is, on a base level, if someone told me to write a blurb for my Forspoken review, that is exactly what I would say. So, as you can see, there's a lot of people in the middle. If we move back to the Metacritic here, there's a few more 9s and 8s, which is grand. Easy Allies gave it an 8. I'm kind of going off the bigger websites here because I haven't heard of half of these websites. Game Informer 7.5. That's what I said. I said, in my eyes, at the very highest, Forspoken is like a 7.5 if you're really in the mood for an open world game. I also think that comes into the conversation too, where you need to be in the mood for an open world game to enjoy an open world game. Like, I can kind of not be looking for a 3D platformer or not be looking for a shooter or a third person shooter or like a loot based game, but it can suck me in by just playing it. Where if I'm not in the mood for an open world game, then if I go and sit down and try to play an open world game, all of the issues would just hit me straight in the face. So then we go down to the lower reviews. Dexerto, I don't know how you actually pronounce that, but if we click to read the full review, I do have it open here somewhere else. So, Forspoken, eye-catching combat, can't save a disappointing RPG. Totally fair blurb. I completely understand what they're saying. Again, it all depends on where you're coming from. So if we scroll down, I have read through these, but I kind of want to go to the verdict because, I mean, we're not going to sit here and read reviews. So, while Forspoken delivers a solid action-based combat system with an array of challenging bosses, which it does, well, the bosses I found the combat quite easy, but it was still fun. It fails to create an engaging narrative, which I agree to, thanks to the surface-level characters and, at times, unbearable dialogue, which, again, I completely understand. The dialogue at points was unbearable, but for me, the sort of cringe eventually grew on me. And not only that, the outdated open worlds, which, again, completely agree, feels like more of a checklist rather than an opportunity for exploration, leaving you yearning for landscapes from other games that are more memorable and less lifeless. Completely agree with everything they have to say. Now, the less lifeless part is something I would like to highlight because lifeless can be done right. And I think Forspoken almost does it right. Where if you look at Breath of the Wild, if you look at Mad Max, if you look at The Pathless, these open world games, they do, and Sonic Frontiers actually, they do the lifeless right. Where the world is lifeless, it feels empty, but it deliberately feels empty, and it creates a certain atmosphere. And I think Forspoken kind of straddles that line, where at points the lifeless world and the ruins and the burnt down villages, it makes sense in the context of the story because there's this break, which is a big massive basically a plague spreading throughout the world, so it makes sense that it has that sort of run down, empty, apocalyptic feeling, so it works in that sense. But I think the difference between that and, say, The Pathless or Breath of the Wild is that Breath of the Wild brings me to places naturally and organically rather than a checklist where I'm just looking at markers on a map. So while the world feels lifeless and empty, you still get sucked into it and it creates the atmosphere. Whereas with Forspoken, since you're not like fully sucked into the world by just being immersed in it, then I think the lifelessness kind of, it kind of seeps through the cracks, if you understand where I'm going. And ultimately, Forspoken lives or dies with its combat and movement. I would add into there the movement as well, because it does. So if you fell in love with it in the demo, it may be worth your time. However, if you're looking for an engaging RPG that immerses you in its world with a strong main narrative and interesting side activities, this is certainly not it. And again, I totally agree. And I think this highlights an issue with scored reviews, because, to be honest, that verdict there is almost exactly what I would have to say. So that's 2 out of 5, which is 4 out of 10. Yes, I'm good at math. So that's a 4 out of 10. I believe, even though I agree with pretty much everything that was said in that verdict, I believe Forspoken is a 6 out of 10 if I'm to put a score on it. Like, hovering between a 6, maybe 6.5. So I think this just highlights an issue with scored reviews, which I think are stupid, where even though we have the same conclusion, give or take, I did read through these reviews, so even though we have roughly the same conclusion and a lot of the same criticisms and a lot of the things that we liked about it, we still arrive at two completely different points. And then also when it comes to different reviewers, and again with scores, is that narrative isn't too important for me. If the gameplay systems are fun and engaging enough, then that's enough to carry a game for me in most cases. So in a case like this, where I think the world is interesting to explore, or the backstory of the world is interesting to explore, should I say. The combat is really fun, the movement is fun. The lack of like a compelling story and sort of cheesy, and then all the cheesy dialogue, it doesn't detract from the experience as much for me as it would for others, because I don't put as much of an emphasis on narrative, which is something I feel a lot of people just don't really take into consideration when they're reading reviews. Is that, again, as I'll come back to this point about you have to be in the mood for an open world game. If I was really in the mood for an open world game and I was really enjoying just listening to a podcast, sitting down, clearing off objectives, then I could see me giving Forspoken a 7.5 out of 10. But because I'm not in that mood, I'm like, on a 6. So there's a lot of different things, there's a lot of different nuance to like understanding reviewers, and this is why, and a lot of people say it, the best kind of reviewers to follow are the reviewers that you can listen to personally and you can understand the perspective they're coming from and the things they like and the things they dislike, so then you can align your opinions with or like against them. Because there are certain reviewers that say focus more on story and writing, where they put so much emphasis on story and writing that I don't really resonate with the reviews because I don't really care about it. Whereas if someone's very gameplay focused, then they're the people that I would tend to listen to more, because that's the thing that's more important to me. So there is a lot of nuance to all this review stuff, and obviously that's why there's such a big difference in the scores. So then I also took some notes. So these are very rough notes here. So I took some notes on, say, the Easy Allies review, which I have up here. I don't really like their format here. It's kind of hard to read. But like, after all is said and done, Forspoken emerges as a solid new IP. It has fair share of issues, which it does, but the longer you spend time in Athia, the more its world draws you in, with its intriguing combat and simple pleasure of freely crossing a massive environment with spellbinding abilities. Completely, totally agree with that. Luminous Productions is definitely onto something with its concept. It just needs a bit more focus and refinement, which is something I said in my review too. At the very least, Forspoken proves its worth on its own merits, on its own terms, and demonstrates potential to someday hang alongside Square Enix staple franchises. And they gave it an 8 out of 10. But there again, I read this review, but we're just going off conclusions here. I'm not going to properly read the whole thing. But again, like, a lot of the stuff there I agree with, but it got an 8 out of 10. So I like to see the big range in reviews, but again, I would also like to see, like, scores are useless. Like, scores are absolutely useless, because again, a lot of the stuff, if I go back to my notes here, similar points to me about the annoying dialogue, but that it has its moments that grow on you. I think they were slightly more critical on the dialogue as I was, but at the end of the day, there's still some level of charm that in some instances might actually draw you in. And then they said they enjoyed the overall narrative and the backstory of the world, which again, something I completely agree with. And I think, like, they talk about the side quests too, and how a lot of the side quests you're following cats to collect these items, and again, they're just kind of stupid. But then they come to the conclusion that it's an 8 out of 10. So all of this substance of this review, even though a lot of it's similar to mine and theirs, we come to completely different scores. And then a lot of people just sit there, see 8 out of 10, they're like, oh, Easy Allies. Like this review will be so much better without the score, I think, because I think it confuses things at the end. Like, I think it really just confuses things at the end. And then I have one more review, another really positive review. And now this is from a small site, Gaming Trend. Well, I don't know how small they are, but all I know is I've never heard of them. So they have 90 out of 100 Forspoken is an incredible title. Although the story suffers from being a bit too generic, the gameplay is inventive, magical, and an absolute blast, which I 100% agree with. This is a game I'll come back to again and again just to move around the world and exist in a fascinating world. Forspoken is an exciting leap forward for action games, and I can't get enough of it. So again, this is a fun world to exist in, run around. While it's not on the same level of Spider-Man, I can't fault anyone for wanting to jump back into this game and run around and clear things off the open world, just as a sort of like fun thing to do to kill an hour. But like, again, like incredible movement, combat mechanics, gigantic, gorgeous world. But there, like the world, I think a gigantic world is a downside, but it is gorgeous. Immense amount of things to do, yes, but again, I think that's a drawback. Many spells to master. I don't think master is the word to use, but there are loads of spells. And then amazing boss fights, which some of the boss fights are fun, but in general the game is too easy. So it got to a point where I was spamming down bosses in a minute, you know? And the cons, the story plays it too safe, which it definitely does. The world doesn't play it safe, but the story, the narrative, like I knew exactly where it was going. Fraying the cuff can be annoying and unnecessary tutorials. And then finally we have one of my favourite reviewers, and that is ACG, and his verdict is wait for a deep sale, which is something, now on the GameXplain review, I think I said if it was like $50-$60 and you're really in the mood for an open world game, then I probably would say, look, go buy it, it's fun. But you can always just wait for a deep sale, which is something I do agree on. It definitely needs a sale. I would never buy this game at full price. So the main points I took from here is the overuse of the F word, which is I completely agree with, because I think somebody said in one of the reviews I read that they counted something like 26 F words across the whole game, and there's not that many cutscenes. And it's just completely jarring, and it kind of makes our character very one note, which I dislike. There was a few parts of the narrative that were quite they were deep. Well, not deep, but they were like emotional. And in some cases the emotion worked on me, but in other cases they felt unearned. So, and then he goes into the unlikable characters, the modern writing, and how the writing does get a bit better at the end, which I do agree with. But the modern writing mixed with the like fantastical fantasy world is something that is very difficult to do, and something that I haven't played. I don't watch that many movies, I don't watch that many TV series, but I haven't really seen it done properly well. I mean, God of War Ragnarok probably is a good, is probably the benchmark of what the Marvel writing can be in a game, because a lot of it is very Marvel writing, but it's done well. And the characters kind of have, you know, American accents, and they speak in a certain way that probably, you know, they're not like Norse, they're not speaking like Norse mythological gods, they're speaking like American people. But somehow it works in that game. Again, writing and story isn't too big for me, so I can't really put my finger on why, but I think if you play it, you understand. So then another thing he brings up is the standing in place and random black screens on cutscenes. So when you finish detours, there was points where you would finish the detour, which are side quests, and Frey would just stand there, just like this, for like 30-40 seconds, and then it would go to black screen, and then you'd be able to play again. Or after a cutscene, it would go to black screen, and then Frey would just stand there. The camera would be behind her. She'd just stand there like this. But we were talking about ACG, and he said the game looks great, which it does. I have noticed, I didn't notice this during playtime, but after going back and reviewing the footage and stuff, the game is quite low resolution. It really struggles with resolution, and it definitely has a dynamic resolution trying to, you know, keep the frame rate steady. The parkour movement are fun but janky, and I said that too. And he also was giving criticism about the enemy design, too few enemies, but he did enjoy fighting the human enemies, which I actually enjoyed fighting all the enemies. I do think that there was slightly, it could have done with a slightly more, like a bigger enemy pool, but it wasn't too big of an issue for me. But what he said was that the spells were weak at the start, which I don't agree with. I actually really liked how the spells felt from the start. And he does agree with that. He says, like, it does get better once you start to get the new powers. And then I think one of my main criticisms was that the gear just doesn't feel fleshed out, and he had the same problem. So in general, like, you can see just how different things can be, because like from reading all of these, a lot of the issues were the same. A lot of people, bar, what was it, Gaming Nexus or whatever, whichever that one was a Gaming Nexus, yeah, didn't like the writing, which I completely understand. A lot of people agreed that it had some sort of fun, and that's one thing I really like what ACG does, is that he focuses on the fun factor of the game, which this game does have a lot of. The writing was a bit jarring, but sometimes there was a bit of charm to it. Like, the consensus was pretty similar, but the outcomes and the verdicts were quite different. Like, there was quite a range. Like, if we go back to the Metacritic here, quite a range, like 40, 50, a lot of 50s, a lot of 60s, 70s. But then there's a good few 75s and 80s and 90s, but they all pretty much have the same conclusion. So, yeah, I don't like review scores, but yeah, I just wanted to discuss it because I kind of have, I guess, insight because I'm a reviewer now. But like, I think I might do this for other games because it's quite fun to just sit down and go through the different reviews, what people had to say, especially on the games that I was also reviewing, because obviously, as you consume like YouTube video reviews and podcasts, like your opinion will change. It's just how things happen. When you get more information, your opinion will change. Someone might say a point that would be like, oh yeah, well maybe I was wrong about thinking whatever way I was thinking, and that next time I'll think about this when I review a game. So I think it's especially helpful for me to flesh out my opinions on games, that if I review a game, obviously I don't know anybody else that has played them, so it's 100% completely my own opinion. But then it also is good to take in other people's opinions and sort of challenge your own with what they said and how that should affect your score and stuff. So I think that I'll do this for Dead Space Remake, because as of right now, I'm not reviewing the game. But I think I'll do that for Dead Space Remake. So yeah, I really appreciate your time. I did review this game for GameXplain and on my own channel. So check out my own channel if you want. It's a short review, it's only 5 minutes long to fully get my thoughts on the game. But yeah, I really appreciate your time. I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.